Sisters and brothers, for the time is ours to share together this Lord's Day with your prayers and the Holy Spirit's help. I'd like to preach part 2 of this New Year's series entitled, Before We Get Started, Questions We Must Answer. But who do you say that I am?
All right. Amen.
You may be seated in the presence of the Lord. Before we get started, questions we must answer, part 2. Who do you say that I am? In recent memory, towards the end of every year and at the beginning of a new year, a phrase begins to circulate as people begin to make their New Year's resolutions. As folks begin to reflect on the current state of affairs in their lives, determined to be better in the new year than they were in the old year, they begin to say among their friends, their family, and undoubtedly on Facebook, this is going to be their year. Because this is the year. They are finally going to have whatever big life change they have been thinking about. To sum up their sentiments, they tack on to the end of their post or their comments with us in person what has become for us a new cliche, the phrase, New Year, New Me. And while this is surely admirable, and I indeed pray that that is actually the case for people, because I really do want everyone around me to win, oftentimes the reality is a more accurate representation would not be to say New Year, New Me, but rather New Year, same me. As a recent Business Insider article suggests, from oddly enough a Yale-based psychology study, 80% of New Year's resolutions fail by February. This year looks no better, as researchers have discovered that this year expectations are especially low. People who tend to make resolutions have come to the thought that it's more about how long you can keep the resolution than actual change. It seems as if success is now defined as a longer temporary period of altered behavior rather than a permanent lasting change in behavior. If there is no permanent change in behavior, the reality is there can be no new year, new me.
All right. Yeah.
Stephen Covey helps explain this when he writes in his best-selling book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that change is a process. Covey writes, sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny.
All right.
Yes, while change within a person starts with a thought and a corresponding action, that action must become habit. That habit must become a part of their character. And once it is a part of a person's character, then true change or true transformation has occurred within that person. Beloved, I would like to take Covey's argument a step further, for you see, while we certainly have our own power and our own agency to do what we set our mind to do, the reality is, if we could have changed ourselves, by ourselves, in ourselves, of ourselves, because of ourselves, the reality is we would have done it already. The reality is we wouldn't need a new year to make a new resolution for what many of us, myself included, is the umpteenth year in a row that we're saying that same thing about the same thing, and we really are just the same me in a new year.
All right.
The only thing that has changed is the date on the calendar. As a preacher of the gospel who at his core has to believe that people can change, I come to remind somebody and perhaps to convince somebody for the first time that the change you are seeking in your life will not come only by or from you. Change, by the fact that it is changed, must have some outside force working on it in order to accomplish it. As a preacher of the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, I believe that true, lasting, permanent, worthwhile change can only occur because of a revelation one receives having encountered Jesus.
Amen.
Sisters and brothers, before we get started, we must ask and answer the question our text is begging of us, and that is the question that Jesus poses to his disciples: but who do you say that I am? Just like the old preachers used to admonish the younger preachers, you had better get your Jesus right. Or nothing else will be right. We will see in our text today, particularly through the life of Peter, true change in our lives, even for the most best of us, can occur after receiving and acting upon the revelation of who Christ is. Just like the text indicates, this revelation of who Jesus is changes everything. So before we get started, the question becomes, how then do we come to this revelation? Look at the text, child of God. While each of our lives and each of our journeys will be different, if the text has any clues of how we come to this revelation of who Christ is, we must first follow Christ through difficult places. The text says in verse 13, now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? Beloved, don't miss this detail in the text, for your deliverance is always in the details. The text here indicates to us is that Jesus is traveling. The disciples are going with him. You see, Jesus is not simply hopping in an Uber or on the Metro North. When you read in the surrounding context of the text, Jesus and his disciples have been going all around the Sea of Galilee. Crossed over from the area identified in chapter 15, verse 39 as Magadan, located on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. Now when we find them, they have crossed over to the other side by boat. Now walked about 20 miles north of the Sea of Galilee to a city called Caesarea Philippi. Stay with me. Caesarea Philippi has an interesting history. Caesarea Philippi had been destroyed and rebuilt and renamed. As you can gather by what I've told you about its location, about 20 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, although it is a city that was located in Hebrew land, it now has a Roman name. See, it's named after the emperor or Caesar, and it's named after Philip, not to be confused with Philippe, but Philip, the local ruler at the time. In Caesarea Philippi, Greek and Roman culture would have been seen and felt and experienced everywhere. Pagan temples and idols would have abounded. You see, Caesarea Philippi was a Roman city in Hebrew territory. My God, today somebody will catch that on the way home.
All right.
This is where Jesus has gone. This is where Jesus has led his disciples. Now read your Bible, child of God. This is right after chapter 15. The Pharisees and the scribes have challenged Jesus and his disciples about keeping the traditions of the elders. This is right after Jesus is impressed by the Canaanite woman's faith and he heals her daughter instantaneously. This is right after Jesus cured the crowds, making the mute speak, making the maimed whole, making the lame walk, and making the blind to see. This is right after Jesus has fed the 4,000, this time with 7 loaves and a few small fish. This is all happening right after these events, not counting what has happened all 15 chapters earlier. Now after they have crossed over by boat and now they have come to this city called Caesarea Philippi, a place that represents the worst of their personal situation. Come to a place that represents the worst of their political situation. They've come to a place that represents the very big problem that they all wanted to change, and that is the problem of Roman oppression and occupation in Hebrew land. It was a personal and political problem that they could not and cannot change by themselves. This is the place where Jesus has come, and this is the place where Jesus has led his disciples. But you see, everything was fine in Magadan. Everything was fine around the Sea of Galilee. Why did Jesus have to come here? Remind them of their most dire, most intense, and most impressing problem. Beloved, I have news for you today. Like the psalmist said, Jesus doesn't lead you just beside the still waters. Jesus doesn't lead you just beside the green pastures. But Jesus leads you through the valley of the shadow of death too. See, Jesus leads through easy places. And Jesus also leads to difficult places. But beloved, neither of those things are really your concern. The fact of the matter is, neither of those things are really under your control. The fact of the matter is, Jesus goes where Jesus wills. And your job is to follow wherever Jesus leads. And I'm afraid that following Jesus wherever he leads is not always going to be easy. Remember, these disciples have left all to follow him. They've left their families. They've left their jobs. They've left their budding and aspiring careers. They've left their homes. They've left their assets. They've left all to follow him. They've been through the highest of highs. They've been through the lowest of lows. They have followed Jesus literally through storms. They followed him through tests, through trials, through church fights with the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They followed him through literal hunger. They followed him through the actual desert. They followed him on a raging sea. They even followed the path of the rough highways. They have followed Christ even through the difficult places. Beloved, we too, like these disciples, must have the same resolve. We too must have the same commitment. We too must follow Christ through the difficult places of our lives. We've got to follow Christ through the heartache. We've got to follow Christ through the pain. We've got to follow Christ through the storms that rage in our lives. We've got to follow Christ through the tests, through the trials. We've got to follow Christ through the shutdown. We've got to follow Christ through the divorce. We've got to follow Christ through the sickness. We've got to follow Christ through the layoff. We've got to follow Christ through the hell. We've got to follow Christ through the stuff of life. Because guess what? All of that, the heartache, the pain, the storm, the test, the trial, the shutdown, the divorce, the sickness, the layoff, the hell, the stuff, all that is going to come anyway, and you can't change that. If you are going to go through it, you might as well be going with the one who can. Songwriter said, shady green pastures so rich and so sweet, God leads his dear children along where the waters cool flow bathes the weary one's feet. God leads his dear children along because some through the water, and some through the flood, some through the fire, but all through the blood. Somebody else said, I had tears and sorrow. I've had questions about tomorrow. There have been times I didn't know right from wrong, but in every situation, God gave me blessed consolation that my trials only come to make me strong. So through it all, I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God. Oh, through it all, I've learned to depend upon his word. Beloved, if we are to come to this revelation of who Christ is so that we can be changed, we must not only follow Christ through difficult places, we must secondly find clarity about the divine person. The text says, after Jesus leads them to the difficult place of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? They said, some say John the Baptist. But others say Elijah. Still others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. In typical Jesus fashion, Jesus flips it on them in verse 15 and he said to them, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon, son of John. Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. See, church family, I'm convinced these disciples Must have been Baptist. Because wherever you find two Baptists, you'll find at least three opinions. Jesus asked his disciples who people think he is. They come up with several different answers. Some say you're John the Baptist. Some say you're Elijah. Still others say he's Jeremiah or one of the prophets. See, folks try to identify not Jesus, not by who he is, but by what he does. You see, and then they try to compare him to John the Baptist as one who came preaching a new message of repentance. They tried to compare him to Elijah, a miracle worker and a divine healer. Then they tried to compare him to Jeremiah, one of the prophets, one who stood toe-to-toe with kings and delivered divine words of doom and hope on behalf of Almighty God. These disciples show us what we already know, that people will always have different opinions and perspectives. That people will always never agree. And that's okay. What's important here is what Jesus then turns and asks them. He says, I know who they say who I am, but who do you say that I am? And all of a sudden, as you read the text, the disciples fell quiet. None of them had an answer. And that really is a shame, church family. They've been walking with Jesus all this time. As we have said, just alone in the last chapter, they've seen Jesus make the mute speak, the lame whole, the lame walk, and the blind see. They've been hearing his preaching. They've been seeing how he interacts with so many different types of people. They've been traveling with him day and night to so many different places. When Jesus asked them a clarifying question, who do you say that I am? All fall silent. All except one. This goes to say there is a difference between walking with Jesus and actually following Jesus. Peter finally speaks up and he answers in response to Jesus' question. Peter says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus says, blessed are you, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. You see, sisters and brothers, clarity of the divine person can't be found in a book. It can't be found in a seminar. It can't be found in a lecture. It can't be found in a National Geographic special. Flesh and blood has not, cannot, and will not reveal it to you, but only by the Father in heaven. You see, church family, you can read this Bible all day long. You can study your Sunday school lesson every week. You can come and sit in this church and stay in here all day on Sunday. You can get on YouTube and watch all manner of preachers and philosophers pontificate about the Christ. You can get on the hotline and talk to others about him forever and a day. But until you have personal experience, till you have a personal encounter with God, till you have entered into a lifelong, day-by-day dialogue with God for yourself, you will never be able to find clarity of the divine person. See, this question Jesus raises here is not one of identity. Jesus knows who Jesus is, and he doesn't need you to tell him. See, Jesus is not having an identity crisis here. He's not ego-tripping based off the latest rumor or opinion about him. This question Jesus raises here is one of position. It's one of perception. Who do you know Jesus to be? That answer, that decision is one that everybody has to come to for themselves. This answer, this decision cannot simply be an intellectual affirmation. It has to be a soul-arresting affair. It has to be a trust through time and eternity. You see, Christ must be the center. Point around which our lives revolve. Christ must be the storm center, our refuge when life gets rough. Christ must be the power center, our source and supply. Who we believe Christ to be, who we trust Christ to be, who we have the faith to see Christ as must be the foundation of our lives. If we are to come to this revelation, who Christ is, so that we can truly be changed. We must not only follow Christ through difficult places. We must not only find clarity of the divine person, we must thirdly and finally free control over dominated people. Jesus said to Peter in verse 18, after Peter declares his personal revelation of who Jesus is, Jesus said, and I tell you, you are Peter. And on this rock, I will build my church. The gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. And whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Something amazing happens. After Peter shared his revelation about who Christ is, Christ turns and tells Peter who he is. Not only that, Christ turns and tells Peter who he will be. He says, you are Peter. And then, a play on words, Jesus says, and on that Petra, or on this rock. Rock being the revelation of who Christ is in somebody's life will be the rock on which Christ will build his church. He'll build it so firmly and securely and strongly that the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. He then tells Peter, I will give you the keys to the kingdom. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then another play on words, Jesus gives Peter the authority to bind and to loose, or to teach and interpret the law of God, the word of God, so that people can come to God. Church family, something interesting happens when we too come to this revelation of who Christ is. Like Peter, when we come to this revelation of who Christ is, Christ in turn reveals to us who we are. Christ in turn reveals to us who we shall be. Not only to him, but in relationship with others. You see, sisters and brothers, a part of who you are is that you have been divinely created and commissioned to solve a problem. The world may tell you that your existence is a problem. But your existence is only a problem to the problem. Your life is a solution to something that needs to be fixed. I'm glad that the NAACP Youth Council, that the Deltas are worshiping with us today. For in their own way, their organizations, like so many others, show us and embody this truth. That in our own uniqueness created by God and empowered by the revelation of God, together with that, Christ builds his church. Each one of us in our unique gifts and talents and callings into this living organism known as the body of baptized believers, known as the called out community of Christ confessors, this instrument and vehicle by which God carries out his divine and perfect purposes for the world, this institution from which flows salvation, healing, peace, deliverance, purpose, power, organization, and hope. It's on this rock, the confession, the revelation of our faith in who Christ is, on which Christ builds his church. Text doesn't say that he builds a wall. Text says that he builds a church. Refuge to bring people in. The text doesn't say that he builds a prison to systematically destroy people. But he builds the church, a place where everybody is free. The text doesn't say he builds a country club to flaunt our money and our status. The text says he builds a church, a community where everybody is somebody because one body died and rose again. See, the church is the hospital for the sick. Church is the rehab for the sinner. The church, it's the fill-up station for the weary. The church, it's the sanctuary for the endangered. The church, it's the house of prayer, not the house of predators. Church is a place that has the authority and the power to change this old world. That, my friends, is who Christ has called us to be. So as we get ready to sit down, before we get started, there's a question that we must answer. That question is the same question that Jesus posed to his disciples there at Caesarea Philippi. That question is, but who do you say that Jesus is? For an answer to that question, got to reach back and use an old clothes that Reverend S.M. Lockridge made famous. And I, like him and like Jesus, have to ask you a question. Do you know him? And have you tried? Lockridge said that he's a seven-way king. He's the king of the Jews. That's a racial thing. But he's the king of Israel. That's a national king. The Bible says that he's the king of righteousness. He's the king of the ages. He's the king of heaven. He's the king of glory. The Bible that I read tells me that he is the King of kings and the Lord of lords. Oh church, do you know him? Have you tried him? David said the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. You see, my king is a sovereign king. He's enduringly strong. He's entirely sincere. He's eternally steadfast. He's immortally graceful. He's imperially powerful. He's impartially merciful. Oh church, do you know him? Have you tried him? Peter said he's God's son. He's a sinner's savior. He's the centerpiece of civilization. He stands in the solitude of himself. Simply, he's awesome. He's unique. He's unparalleled. He's unprecedented. He's the loftiest idea in literature. He's the highest personality in philosophy. He's the supreme problem in higher criticism. He's the fundamental doctrine of true theology. He's the cardinal necessity of spiritual religion. He's the miracle of this age. He's the superlative of everything good that you choose to call him. He's the only one qualified to be the all-sufficient Savior. Oh, church, I got a question for you. Do you know him? Have you tried him? He supplies strength for the weak. He's available for the tempted and the tried. He sympathizes and he saves. He guards and he guides. He heals the sick. Oh, I got a question for you this morning. Do you know him? Have you tried him? He cleanses the lepers. He forgives sinners. He discharges debtors. He frees captives. He defends the feeble. He blesses the young. He serves the unfortunate. He regards the aged. He rewards the diligent. And he beautifies the meek. Oh, church, I got a question for you this morning. higher. He's the key to knowledge. He's the wellspring of wisdom. He's the doorway of deliverance. He's the pathway of peace. He's the road of righteousness. He's the highway of holiness. He's the gateway of glory. Oh, church, I got a question for you. Have you tried him? Do you know him? His office is manifold. His promise is sure. His light is matchless. His goodness is limitless. His mercy is everlasting. His love never changes. His word is enough. His grace is sufficient. His reign is righteous. And his yoke is easy. And his burden is light. Oh, church, I got a question for you. Have you tried him? Do you know him? I wish I could describe him to you, but he's indescribable. I wish I could describe him to you, but he's incomprehensible. I wish I could describe him to you, but he's invincible. I wish I could describe him to you, but he's irresistible. I got a question for you. Have you tried him? Do you know him? You can't get him out of your mind. You can't get him off your hand. You can't outlive him. You can't live without him. The Pharisees couldn't stand him, but they found out they couldn't stop him. Pilate couldn't find him and call him. The witnesses couldn't get